You are now listening to the Serious Growth Podcast with your host, Leo Costa Jr.
You know, in 1982, 39 years ago, I took a trip to the East Bloc, Bulgaria, that changed my life forever. Not only that, the information that I learned over there was so impactful and so ahead of our time, meaning our time in the U.S., that so much of that information is relevant today. And I've always said, as I've gotten older, that the mark of a good program of any kind is that it stands the test of time. My journey to Bulgaria was, I was one of, I think, 17 or 19 people that were actually picked. You had to apply, and there were only about 17 and 19 of us that went on that trip. It's pretty amazing. And, you know, I must tell the story as a sort of a clueless American at that time. I remember leaving the U.S., and I told my wife, I said, you know, when I get there, I'll make sure that I give you a call. Little did I realize that they were so far behind in technology, like making a fucking phone call to the U.S. I mean, I had to, there were like, I think I was in a town called either Sofia or Varna. I think it was Sofia. And believe it or not, this is 1982. Believe it or not, there was only one place that you could make a phone call to the U.S. It was like this hotel, the only hotel that I could go to. Keep in mind, there's like something like 9 hours difference. And not only that, so I had to go to this certain hotel, and the way that they made the call to the U.S., unlike how we just pick up a phone and call and you get connected, I had to give the person at the front desk my phone number, and then they said in their best English that they could possibly say was sit, and it took an hour before they connected. You know? Well, fuck, I wasn't able to call home for like 4 or 5 days because, you know, between, I was there to do a seminar. I was there learning the techniques of the Bulgarians because they dominated Olympic weightlifting, which was amazing because you got to consider back in those days, Russia was the big dog on the block. They were King Kong, you know. So this little town or this little country in Bulgaria, in as little as 9 years, basically overtook and became the big dog. Anyway, so we were there to garner information because they had all this, you know, supposedly this information that made them great, and they were willing to share that. And you have to understand that sharing information back in those days, I mean, we were on a tour where Bulgaria was one of the stops. We stopped in Czechoslovakia, we stopped in Russia, and we stopped in, like I said, Bulgaria. And just to give you an idea how hush-hush this information and secret this information was, when we came into Russia, before I start talking about Bulgaria, because they made the bigger impact on me, the Russian coaches took their athletes 2 hours away. They didn't want to get us to get near their athletes or let us in on any of the real information. Unlike Bulgaria. Bulgaria was so forthcoming. Anyway, we'll get to that. It took me 4 or 5 days to finally call home. I mean, my wife was freaking out. She didn't know who to call. And what an eye-opener. You know, I've said it before, in America, we just don't really understand how lucky we really are. And we have so many things at our fingertips, you know, not only the phone calling, but just even getting food, a staple of meat and protein in Bulgaria was very inconsistent. It's hard to understand that and you know, imagine that would happen in our country. It's scary. And yet I saw this firsthand. Anyway, so the phone calling thing was like my first wake-up call. The bigger wake-up call was when I actually started going to some of the seminars that these guys were putting on for us. I had the honor of going to seminars that were given by gold medalists, Olympic coaches, top-notch doctors and scientists. I mean, the Bulgarians laid it all out for us, for the group of 17 that was there. And again, you have to have a stated goal. When you set up a training regimen, and that includes a diet, you have to have a stated goal. So, to be clear, the Bulgarian stated goal was to develop the strongest men in the world in Olympic weightlifting. That was it. The stated goal. So now what did they have to do to make that happen? And so the Bulgarians laid this thing out for us, with the idea of creating the strongest men in the world. What did that mean in the weight room? And this is when I learned about how the Bulgarians used to do, and I saw this up close and personal. I was in the weight room, the lifting room, with all the top national Olympic athletes, the big boys. I was 5 feet, 10 feet away from these guys on a daily basis watching what they did. So we got a bird's eye view of how they train. And back in those days, believe it or not, they were training 5 times a day. 5 fucking times a day. I mean, I couldn't even believe that. Again, I'm coming more from a bodybuilding background, so it's different type of training to begin with, but their training was so different than the Russian athletes and the Czechoslovakian Czech athletes. 5 times a day. So what they did is, again, in Olympic lifting, it's about the guy who can lift the most weight and continue to do that and have 3 different attempts when you fail to keep lifting more weight. So what the Bulgarians did is they were very specific to a goal. That was the stated goal, is to get them strong. So they did 1-rep maxes, 50 to 55 1-rep maxes every day, and they trained 5 times a day. All right, let's take a quick break so I can tell you about our product.
Do you want a bone-crushing grip? Good, because you're gonna get one with the amazing new TRS gripper. It's a progressive grip builder with longer handles and a special ergonomic design that's like a dozen hand grippers in one. Start off easy and work your way up to quickly build your grip strength from wet noodle to pulverizing. The package includes a video from the world-famous strength coach, Dr. Russ Horine, the man who worked with Leo Costa to help bring you big beyond belief in the Bulgarian Power Burst. Dr. Horine shows you a simple and easy to follow workout plan that takes just minutes a day right from in front of your TV set if you want. So click on the link below and let's get started building you a stronger, firmer, bone-crushing grip.
The key to their training was to never overtrain their athletes. And you might think, how can you possibly not overtrain when you're doing 50 to 55 1-rep maxes every single day? Well, what they did is their training sessions over that 5 periods throughout the day were anywhere from 15 minutes to as long as 25, 30 minutes. And one of the things that Bulgarians did not believe in was they didn't believe in warming up. They didn't believe in stretching. They were of the mindset that the body becomes its function. And I want to say something. The Bulgarians were really big into application being the number one priority versus theory. In other words, they didn't read the information that was out there scientifically in theory. In other words, having people tell them that in theory to become the strongest man in the world, you should train like this. They didn't believe in that because they believed to a great extent that they didn't want theory to hamstring them from thinking outside the box. It's a really interesting concept because when you go into a gym or a Olympic lifting center, like they did, and you say, okay, here's the equipment that I have in front of me. The stated goal is to create the strongest men in the world. how does that happen? Without paying attention to theory necessarily. Well, they were outside the box thinkers, and this is how they created this idea about doing 1 rep maxes, because it was very specific to their training when they went to their Olympic lifting meets. It was to go up to that bar. It was to lift that weight up and over their head. So they were very specific to the goal. That's really important. You have to understand that. And they figured out that the body becomes its function. In other words, if you teach your body that it needs to warm up, then that's exactly what the body has to do. It has to warm up. And, you know, when I saw what they were doing, I thought to myself, how in the world can we possibly do this, you know, as when we do this training for bodybuilding? But nevertheless, they believed that. And it was hard to dispute what they were saying, simply because when you become number 1 in the world in only 9 years, and you're a country that's so much smaller than King Kong, Russia, they're doing something right. And so what I learned from them was outside the box thinking. They taught me this. They said, you know, it's virtually impossible to overtrain the physiology if you don't train that long. And the problem that we had here in the U.S. was we were constantly, back in those days, we were constantly overtraining the physiology. In other words, we would be in the gym an hour and a half, 2 hours. I knew guys that were in there even longer than that. They were severely, and we were, for the most part, overtraining on a regular basis. And so what did that mean? That meant that you were exposing yourself, when you're overtraining, to injury, for sure. And actually, you were exposing yourself from reaching your full athletic potential. Okay, so we have coaches and doctors telling us it's virtually impossible to overtrain if you keep your training sessions between 30 to 45 minutes. Because they were talking to me as someone who was trying to get this information so I could apply it as a bodybuilder. I was very upfront with them because they were being very upfront with me. I even told them, I said, look, I need you to know, just because you're being so transparent to begin with, I need you to know that this information I'm gathering here, I'm going to use it. I'm going to publish a book. I came over here to hopefully get some information to publish a training course. And just so you know that, because the reason why I said that to them is because, I mean, Russia was just like, they didn't want us anywhere near their athletes or their real, to get near their real information. They were so secretive about their information. Listen, if you're not number 1 in those days in that part of the world, it's an embarrassment to not be number 1. So you can only imagine that when the Bulgarians knocked these guys off, it was a huge embarrassment, even to the point where they would actually, this is the Russians, they would actually send people in as spies. They would be, they could be waiters. They could be people that just were there to try to find work in other areas, but their primary goal was to find out how the Bulgarians were training. They needed to find out why these guys all of a sudden were dominating world competition. So that made me think that, look, these guys were being so open with us, letting us watch their athletes train. Then, going to seminars and backing up in the seminars what their athletes were doing. That's unheard of. I mean, even in most, gyms in America where bodybuilders are training, a lot of times bodybuilders didn't want to share their information. They were putting it out there and saying, this is what we do, And so anyway, I told them, I said, look, I want to get information so I can publish a training course, for bodybuilders. They said, look, we're not concerned about you taking this information because, and here's another thing that was so amazing and it really highlights the outside of the box thinking. They said, look, we're going to give you this information because by the time you take this back to the West, we will be on to something else, something brand new. In other words, they weren't concerned, which I don't understand why Russia had sent spies in to do all this undercover work, because they were pretty transparent about what they did, and they backed it up with winning competitions. So nevertheless, that was telling when they said, look, we're happy to share this information with you. By the time it gets out into book form in your country, we're on to something else. Go for it. Amazing. So it was an amazing time, to be able to see all this up front, to get the kind of information, and to talk to the doctors like we did. Can you imagine getting that information? The key for me was thinking, okay, how do I really apply this, which we'll get into a little bit. The other thing that the Bulgarians were really transparent about was their diet, because obviously you just can't become who they became without having some kind of a proper diet strategy or regimen. And so I asked them, how do you feed your athletes? And they said, we feed them a high-fat diet. Now, 1982, in America, eating a high-fat diet was really a big negative, because most people thought that eating fat was the culprit. It was the cause of all this heart disease. And so I'm there with that kind of a mindset. And I said, well, look, in my country, eating fat in your diet is unhealthy. Their response that was very candid is they said, we don't care if it's unhealthy. Now, as it turned out, it wasn't. Many years later, we know that fat is not the culprit. That's another story. But at the time, they said, we don't care if it's unhealthy. Our stated goal is to create the strongest athletes in the world. And that means to eat a high-fat, high-protein diet. I was stunned at first. But then I started thinking about it. I started thinking, look, when you, in the context of, creating the strongest athletes in the world, and that's what you have to do, they were being specific to the goal. It's not going to sit real well with a lot of people. But for those that are athletic and they're competitive, we basically do what we have to do to become competitive. I mean, that's kind of what they were saying to me. I didn't have to agree with it, but that's what they meant. This is what you have to do or not do. You don't have to stretch. You don't have to warm up because you're teaching the body that you're having to do that. It's a waste of time. That's what they were saying to us. So I want to keep this message around that they were just very specific to a goal, and they stated that goal. So what they did is when they did their training, again, not paying attention too much to theory, once they created the result, then what they did is they brought the people, the theorists, the people that did theory, and they said this, and just think of the distinction when you use the application before theory. They told theory, the people that did theory, they said, look, we know this works. Now you figure out why. Can you see the distinction between saying, doing theory first, so in theory this should work, and then going into the gym? They did all, you might think that they did that backwards. But what that did is that opened up their minds to not being afraid to experiment. And that's exactly what you have to do. Okay, so I get this information, and I bring this back to the U.S. So what did I have to do? I followed their strategy. The stated goal for the very first training course that we did, which is called Bulgarian Burst, the stated goal was to put on as much muscle mass as humanly possible. That was it. Didn't pay attention to too much theory. I just followed what they did. It was successful, at least in Olympic lifting. And they assured me when I left there, they said, listen, all you have to do to make this real specific to what you want to do, as putting on as much muscle as humanly possible, you just have to adjust sets and reps. More reps, because volume is the key to putting on muscle mass before strength. And I've talked about that in different shows. One goes with the other, but specifically the stated goal for putting on as much muscle as humanly possible is volume training. End of story. You want to get as strong as you can, but volume is the priority. Okay, so we came back. We designed this training course called Bulgarian Burst. And for those of you who purchased that training course, number one, I thank you very much for your support. But this, again, the stated goal was to put on as much mass as you possibly could. What we did is we figured out that people would not train 5 times a day. So we took another stance, which was very ahead of anything that was out there on the market back in those days. We had people training 3 times a day, 7 days a week, and we adjusted that along the way, but it was basically 3 days, training 3 times a day throughout the week. We had to make a choice and say, do we want to make this a little more commercial? In other words, if we did that, then we tell people maybe to train twice a day. I think back in those days, people would, they were training, some were training twice a day. And you have to understand, Bulgarian Burst was set up for the athlete that wanted to excel at the highest level. So we knew that targeting that market, we would target a person that had the mindset and had the a better ability to overcome and achieve results. But to think that you could have people training 3 times a day, it was an important decision that we made back then, because it was like, well, this thing could flop because people look at that and they're going to say, these guys are out of their mind. 3 times a day, they're certainly overtraining. I heard that so many times over the years when people would, write in and ask questions. But, it was a slow process, and to teach, anytime you're doing something that is out of the ordinary, it's really important to educate who you're trying to sell this information to or present this information to. But we took that chance. And I got to tell you, fortunately, it worked out for us because, again, we made sure that we made our people understand that it's virtually impossible to overtrain the physiology if you keep your sessions brief. I mean, you can do a session in 20 minutes and get a lot done. But it wasn't something that just happened. Just like going from warming up before doing your working sets to not warming up, this is not something that just happens immediately. So here's what ended up happening in the Bulgarian Burst. I wanted to talk about that today because this was our first run out was the Bulgarian Burst, which became hugely successful back in those days. And we decided to take this stance. And what happened was we got a cult following it was amazing. The people that were doing this training course, they were getting results and putting on just what our stated goal was, putting on so much muscle mass that the people and friends that they had thought for sure that these people were taking drugs, and they weren't. This is how powerful Bulgarian Burst was. We learned how to take advantage of the physiology in a way that we didn't destroy it and overtrain it. But it was one of those things that, it was either do or die. And fortunately, it was something that, more than anything else, it created a cult following for us. Even to the point that after that, we wrote 3 or 4 more training courses. But surprisingly, so many people still remember Bulgarian Burst. And as we went along, because change is a constant. Some of you might say, well, why didn't you just leave it at that? Because you know what? You could always improve something. It gets harder and harder to do. Bulgarian Burst was definitely a shining star. But the rest of the training courses that we came up with was an evolution in some ways of Bulgarian Burst, and yet Bulgarian Burst is the foundation. It was such a strong foundation that as we kept developing other training courses like Serious Growth and Big Beyond Belief, they were just a great addition to that foundation. We changed somewhat these courses as we went along, but never to the point where we compromised overall results. And that's a very hard thing to do. So one of the things I wanted to do today was, I'm doing these shows solo, and I just wanted to sort of talk about Bulgaria and what happened in 1982 that really has still stayed with us 39 years later. Let's take a quick pause to tell you about something you are definitely going to want.
Do you want a bone-crushing grip? Good, because you're going to get one with the amazing new TRS gripper. It's a progressive grip builder with longer handles and a special ergonomic design that's like a dozen hand grippers in one. Start off easy and work your way up to quickly build your grip strength from wet noodle to pulverizing. The package includes a video from the world-famous strength coach, Dr. Russ Horine, the man who worked with Leo Costa to help bring you big beyond belief in the Bulgarian Power Burst. Dr. Horine shows you a simple and easy to follow workout plan that takes just minutes a day right from in front of your TV set if you want. So click on the link below and let's get started building you a stronger, firmer, bone-crushing grip.
Okay, at the very end of the shows, what I want to do in these solo podcasts is open it up to a question or one or more. And we have somebody here that's going to be asking a question. This is somebody maybe asking a question on behalf of you out there that are listening to this.
All right, Leo. I've worked out a couple of times, as you know, in my life, and I've always felt like I've got stronger, but not bigger. So if you could tell me why, or tips, or what's going on with that.
Well, I would think that, based on what you're saying, again, it's just, I'd have to dig in a little bit more, diet-wise and all that kind of stuff. But if you're getting stronger, you're probably, the emphasis is probably on lifting more weight, because most people, especially males, it's an ego thing. They want to lift, be strong, lift heavy weight. That's always been, if you ask somebody, hey, would you like to get stronger and lift heavier weight? Because they correlate that with lifting heavier weight with bigger muscle, okay? And that's a half-truth, because when you lift to get stronger, you're going to get stronger. A side effect of lifting stronger is you're going to put on some muscle. It's like this distinction. It's just like when you're training more volume means more repetitions, lighter weight. Males have a hard time with that. We're egotistical and we want to see who can lift the most weight. It's a competitive thing. Not only with other people, but for ourselves. That's how much I can lift. So your physiology is actually responding to what you're doing. You're lifting to get stronger, and you are. And then the muscle is the side effect, the secondary benefit. That's what I mean. If you go in with volume training, in other words, strength training is doing repetitions ranging from 1 to 5 reps, taking longer rest periods, okay, and not doing as many sets as you would do if you were a bodybuilder trying to put on size. Because volume, you need to do more reps and lighter weight and shorter rest periods. It's a different style of training. So what happens in that scenario is you get muscle first, and strength comes as a secondary benefit. You see what I mean? And that's, like I said, it's especially with the males. And then the misconception, and it's an ongoing debate. It still is in bodybuilding. Which is the best way to put on muscle, lifting heavier weight or more reps? You'll get just as many people saying lifting heavier weight, but they don't really understand the physiology to the nth degree. And when you do, then you realize, okay, it's volume training, end of story. Even when I used to go down, I think I mentioned this in the last podcast, when I used to go down to, when I read the magazines and then I go down to Venice Beach and watch these guys train, some of these guys that were professing only, heavy duty, meaning just doing fewer reps and less sets and getting all the size, they were telling us a half truth, because I saw it with my own fucking eyes. I had to. The greater part of their program was more volume. They were doing, actually at the end of each session, they were doing more volume than they were doing strength work. So your body was responding exactly how it was supposed to. You taught it because you were trying to lift more weight. You taught it to get stronger first. And that's not uncommon.
Okay.
All right? That was, by the way, Charlie, that was a very good question.
Thank you.
I'm serious about that. Because, it's, like I said, it's an ongoing debate. And it will be forever. Yeah. Until you get in your ass in a weight room like I've been in forever, and you try everything because your body is a laboratory, you start finding out about this shit. But I'll tell you what, you got to put so much fucking time into it That's the reason why a very small percentage of people in the sport of bodybuilding, it's not unusual for any kind of sport that requires a lot of effort and determination. You have to pay a brutal price to figure out what really works and really doesn't work. Yeah. That's why so much shit on the market it never lives up to its hype. They don't put that kind of time into it. Good question. Okay. Hopefully you got something from this information, and I'll talk to you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Serious Growth Podcast. For more episodes like the one you just listened to, subscribe to us on your mobile podcast app and leave us a review. If you'd like to reach out, you can find us online at seriousgrowth.com. Until next time, train smart and train hard.